Hey y'all, I'm Kelly Moody and you're listening to the Ground Shots podcast, an audio project exploring our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling with farmers, herbalists, craftspeople, naturalists, artists, and more. Hey y'all, welcome to episode 11 of the Ground Shots podcast. I'm currently sitting at my friend's kitchen table on a nice, beautiful, cold, but not raining day in Northern California, Trinity County, California. We've had a lot of rain, thankfully, this past month. Rain, snow, all kinds of things. And I have been here over a month doing a series of house sitting gigs and spent a lot of time by myself and got snowed in Manzanita Ranch. It was really sweet to be snowed in such a beautiful remote place surrounded by national forest, and I got a lot of projects done and time to hang out with myself and watch the birds and the land and manzanita flowers coming out. And even though it was snow coming down and rain and all kinds of wintry things, there was definitely signs of spring popping up everywhere, and I really enjoy seeing those. Actually, we found pedicularis yesterday coming up just barely in the manzanita. It's really sweet. This is an interview with Woniya Thibeault, who is an ancestral skills teacher, and I actually interviewed her in this valley. Let's see, it was early January, and I'm putting hers out now. I have been really trying to get out a bunch of interviews that I did over the last 6 months, and I'm pretty behind. I've been just doing so many, and the time it takes and the funding it takes for me to do it just hasn't allowed me to catch up. And also I was having some tech issues that I hopefully have resolved thanks to Heather's help, who is also the person who does the sound engineering for the podcast. She's so wonderful and skilled. I'm often finding different places to do the work that needs to be done. I don't have an office or a house or anything. I do stuff out of my camper or at the cabin sits that I do, which sometimes have good internet, sometimes don't. Or in cafes and coffee shops, just wherever and however I can manage to do it. It's just a little harder to get it all done on my end. It really helps me to have Heather on the other side. I'm in California right now mostly, and she's in Maine, so we work together that way, and she's got all her ducks in a row, so it's just like my stability in it all, to have her help. So please do join us on Patreon if you enjoy this podcast. It really helps us to keep it going. Also, something new about this episode is that I start to weave in a little music. There's a little song by Ari Feral Cats, and I recorded that with her this September in Oregon, actually in the house where Woniya used to live. So it's kind of a sweet little connection. In my travels, I have been recording friends and people I meet playing music, and that's part of the impetus for this podcast, is kind of capturing the people I've met on the road. And it's been quite a few years that I have been doing this in some incarnation, whether it's a few months out of the year or all the time. And I have heard so much good music as well as so many good stories. So I'm finding that sometimes it's sweet to break up stories with a little sound, little music. So I'll start to weave those in from now on. Let's go ahead and get to this conversation with Woniya and enjoy listening, y'all. Burn, burn with the light that reveals our faces. Burn, burn with the heat that will warm these places. Hi.
Hi, how's it going?
Thanks for sitting down with me at my table here.
Yeah, so lovely.
And it's such a sweet day. And
oh my gosh.
Is this which fork of the Trinity River is this?
It's the South Fork.
The South Fork of the Trinity River, really close to that. You can't hear it. in the
'Cause
background.
It's really low right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, haven't got a lot of rain.
Yeah.
We're out here visiting friends in the woods and thought we'd sit down and chat. So, hi.
Hey.
So, tell me your name and where you live and what you do with yourself.
Sure. My name is Woniya Thibeault, and I grew up in Nevada County, California, and I currently live in Sonoma County in the little town of Bodega. And gosh, I do an awful lot of things with myself. But right now I'm focusing on finishing a couple of books and kind of getting my business a little bit more businessy. But what I do is I teach ancestral skills, big focus on hide tanning and sewing with buckskin and other leathers, grain on, brain tan, buckskin, bark tan. I do a lot of clothing and shoes and some bags and such as well. But I certainly am pretty well-rounded in the ancestral skills. I've taught everything from a lot of focus on animal processing and foods, wild foods, and a lot of food preservation, humane kind of sacred butchering and using the whole animal, definitely a big focus. And for many, many years, I lived off-grid. Right, I can look at you. I lived off-grid on a homestead where we had solar and hydropower and pretty limited power, and grew a big garden and put up most of my food for the year between root cellaring and canning and drying and year-round gardening, and grew market garden for a year and ran an education program on off-grid living, homestead living, ancestral skills, market gardening, permaculture, natural building. So big focuses for me have been the skills that really empower people to make their own choices about how they live rather than feel dependent on the global economy, and encouraging people to have more connection to the land around them and the wild in that landscape and the wild in themselves. And so some of the ways that I feel are most effective to do that are teaching people about the things that they use in their daily lives. And so to me, that's shelter, food, and clothing are things that pretty much most of us interact with most every day. So I'm also really interested in other ancestral skills. Fiber arts and basketry and such have definitely been big focuses for me. But yeah, kind of the fundamentals, and partly to have people be less dependent on the system, but partly too so that they have these kind of visual reminders and tactile reminders in their daily lives that they're an animal connected to the land around them. Get people kind of out of their heads and their faces out of their phones and interacting with and feeling connected to the place that they live.
Yeah, the material realm is a really powerful place to have things that remind you. You know, everybody has different ways they do that.
Yeah.
You know, remind themselves of what's important to them. But
yeah,
to be able to make your clothing or like, your buttons or anything in your life, or have this can of fruit that you picked and you remember the day you canned it and everything.
right.
So you've done the whole farming life too, like you've done that really hardcore, and then now you're doing a lot more teaching and traveling, and like, I mean, you still farm probably some, but like
Not very much anymore, but
Yeah.
a little bit certainly. I mean, I live in the redwoods, so mostly I can grow kale and other brassicas right now, but I certainly aspire to get back to doing more growing. And even at the time, I think that there's a danger with the farming lifestyle in terms of depending too much on that and not enough interaction with the wild around you. I definitely felt like when I was farming, it was hard for me to leave the farm. And I interacted with the wildland a little bit less because I was also keeping animals. But, it was really easy for me to work myself into the ground. And that was part of stepping away from farming, was because I was working, 12, 14-hour days. And there was always more to do than I could possibly get to. And so I started being more interested in shifting towards more wild food and less farming.
It's a hard one. I've
Yeah.
farmed for periods of time too, and you feel kind of guilty leaving sometimes, and like this little spot of land is kind of everything,
Right. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
It's interesting you say like getting out there to the wildlands, because that's like something I think about a lot. Is like, because I've been to the land where you farmed, and
Mm-hmm.
to me, I feel like the wild, whatever that really is in quotations, is so right. I mean, of course, there's logging and all kinds of weird, abusive things happening too, but like to me, it feels like it kind of the tendrils kind of merge somewhere in there.
It's a pretty wild place,
Yeah.
for sure. It's true. Yeah.
Yeah, but in the bigger picture of like getting and in the West, there's so many places to go and so much abundance out there, away from that 1 acre or half acre,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So what, do you ever see yourself maybe being a farmer again, and then somehow having some sort of balance between, I don't know,
Yeah.
tending out there and being in the wilds, and sort of like being in that land, and also being in a place where you have sort of perennial crops or whatever it is?
Yeah. No, I definitely do. I miss elements of it. I think that if I was in a place where it was possible, I would be interested in leaning more towards wild foods than farming, with some integration. But the truth is that most of the areas that were really abundant great wild foods, certainly in the West, mostly are where the cities ended up. A lot of the really productive areas are
Like where?
Like the Bay Area or the Sacramento Delta or the basically like low-lying areas with abundant water and good soil are places where people congregated, and because they were congregating there, like Davis, Redding, places like that, there were villages, and then they became cities, or they're just taken over by agriculture. Most of the wildlands we have left are in the high and hard to get to places, and those aren't the places that were traditionally really abundant wild food. So it's harder to do that anymore. There's huge exceptions, certainly. Acorns are still pretty abundant and such, but it's just a very different landscape with different access now than it was when people were really hunting and gathering as their main subsistence.
And even oaks are not necessarily as healthy and happy as they used to be, right? Because humans don't know how to tend them anymore, right?
Right, yep. And there's sudden oak death and, climate change, certainly, and pressure from wildlife, because there's fewer areas available to them means more pressure in those areas where there's certain areas where I have friends who had a place called Oak Granary, where one of their missions was tending oak trees, and they just weren't seeing many seedling oaks. And I think part of it was predation by deer, because there's so few places left for deer to be that aren't all agriculture. There are deer everywhere, but there's just a lot more pressure than there was.
So you've been doing what we call ancestral skills since you were a teenager, right?
Yeah, 19, so just barely still a teenager, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what is it that sparked your interest in it originally?
Honestly, I feel like I was always really interested in it. I just didn't know that it was available. I didn't know that there were teachers and practitioners to the degree there are. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with like the Little House book series, which is more homesteady, and like Island of the Blue Dolphins and stories of people living really closely to the land. That was what all of my childhood games were. And I was, playing outside, like making forts and storing wild food in the form of like clover or geranium seed heads or, whatever I could find in the yard. I was like harvesting that and putting it up like it was food. So I feel like it's always been a huge part of me. And, starting in high school and then in college, because I definitely have done the higher education thing too. That's what originally brought me back to the West Coast from Vermont, was grad school. But so I studied environmental science and biology and botany. And
I didn't know you have a master's.
I have a master's in environmental science.
From where?
From Oregon State in Corvallis. Mm-hmm. So So yeah, I mean, living closely to the natural world and studying it and getting to know it was always a part of me. And so was crafting, like by the time I was in junior high school, I was sewing a lot of my own clothes or modifying clothes in some way. So it was just kind of a natural extension of my interest in natural history and biology and my interest in crafts to merge them and find ways to do crafts closer and closer to the source and using all of the knowledge that I had and just like relationship to the wild places around me. And my parents were both like in the Sierra Club, and my mom was a major hiker, like every weekend hiking in the Sierras because I grew up in the Sierra foothills. And then my dad was an endurance runner, so he was doing 30-mile trail runs every weekend. So I definitely grew up getting dragged to the woods all the time, whether I liked it or not. And luckily I did like it. But yeah, I couldn't really have gotten away from it.
Mm-hmm. You were saying that you did this. Someone else I interviewed for the podcast did the Sierra Institute. And they mentioned that was a big thing in their life. And you said the other day that you did that as a teen or in your early 20s.
It was between my sophomore and junior years in college. So I was 19. Yeah. So it was the same year that I then went to Rabbit Stick. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on that, I actually chose the Sierra Institute course that I did based on knowing that the instructors had taught ancestral skills at a SUS. It was a kind of troubled youth, like taking troubled youth into the woods and teaching them friction fire and whatnot. So I chose that program based on wanting to learn friction fire and bow making and spoon carving. So I was doing a lot of that while I was out there, wood carving and working on a bow and learning bow drill fires and such. So
and you said the other day that was mainly based in Idaho.
It was all Idaho. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was. We did pretty long trips, like 10 to 14 days. So it was 8 weeks, but it's kind of like chunks of 2 weeks in different areas. So we did like 2 weeks in the Sawtooths and 2 weeks in the White Clouds and a bunch of time in the kind of canyony deserts in southern Utah and the big volcanic belt. And then up to Salmon to Goldbug Hot Springs.
And you've been teaching for I feel like you're someone that teaches at a lot of gatherings and like...
Yeah, I would say I've been teaching at gatherings since I was like 22. I've been knitting and spinning and weaving for longer than I've been doing some of the other ancestral skills. Like I taught myself to spin... I guess, yeah, before that trip, but only, I guess, a year before. But knitting, certainly been doing that since I was like 16. And then I'm definitely a person who likes to really understand processes and likes to work with raw materials. So once I was really engaged with knitting, then it was, pretty natural to want to take it a step back and learn how to spin my own fiber.
Yes, I like process too, for sure. Like learning to bind books. Oh wait, how do you make paper?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. What the definition of what ancestral skills is interesting because people who listen to this, some people know what that is and some people don't. And it, you could call something like knitting and spinning ancestral skills, but also something like hide tanning. And what is it for you? Like, I know you've described it a little bit in this conversation thus far, like why you even want to do those things. But I guess I'm always thinking about what gets included in that definition and what doesn't,
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I guess for me, I use it to describe technologies that go back like pre-industrial revolution, like to describe things that you can do without any materials that came out of a factory. And that's pretty broad. And then by definition, also skills that our ancestors used. And I would say like the skills that really supported them in their daily life. So in that way, spinning and knitting are, I guess I think of them like somehow as like not quite as pure an ancestral skill, like not quite as Stone Age, but they totally are.
Yeah.
They totally are.
Well, what do you think about blacksmithing and all that? Because that's definitely... A little more industrial.
Yeah, I would call that more like a traditional technology, but not necessarily ancestral, because I think it's more recent. I mean, humans haven't been smelting metal for that many centuries. Well, quite a few centuries, I guess. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, yeah, I think of the smelting process as more industrial,
Yeah.
but you can do it on a small scale, and people have.
Mm-hmm.
I guess there's a part of me too that, like, and this isn't true in the definition, but it's how I think about it, is technologies that are less invasive, less complex and resource intensive. And blacksmithing feels a little bit more resource intensive in terms of like so many metal tools and anvils, and you can do it with just charcoal, and a lot of people do, but a lot of people use mined coal and have to make it into coke, and it's it can be kind of intense and polluting, and just more resource and energy intensive. And I guess I think of the things that I'm more interested in ancestral skills are the things that I can do in the woods around me without needing to bring in a lot of resources from elsewhere. And there's not that many people who have a concentration of iron right next to them that is easily to turn into enough tools to then make goods.
You've focused a lot on buckskin and hide tanning and leather making processes, which is definitely energy intensive for humans to do, but it's pretty cool. It's such a like magical alchemical process to be a part of, like bringing something's death back to life, basically.
That's so much a part of it for me. And and I feel like it's such a radical transformation, because you take a hide that's been soaking in water for a while, and I like soaking in water more than bucking in alkaline solutions. But it's one of the like gnarliest, stinkiest, least appealing things, and then you turn it into one of the most beautiful, useful, wonderful things, super appealing things. So it's very alchemical in that way. But yeah, I definitely really honor and have a deep relationship with the animals whose hide I'm tanning, and that's part of the understanding, is that you're giving it a second life. And this animal grew its skin to protect it and work with it as it moved through life, and it does that same thing for us. So it's one of the only substances that was made to be the skin of a living animal, and is easy to transform, or depending on who you talk to, easy or not. But
or how you figure out shortcuts, if there
right,
if there are any.
But it just really lends itself to clothing, because that's what it was grown for, to keep the outside out and the inside in, and protect the animals that move through its life.
It's pretty amazing to think about how humans in different parts of the world discovered that they could preserve skins in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
Lots of
you
different
know more
ways.
a lot about like all the different ways that people did it around the world.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, I don't know what time frame different people discovered it, but it's just
and it's difficult to say, because it doesn't show up in the fossil record, besides as imprints sometimes. But if you're looking at cultures, I mean, certainly there's something really similar to brain tanning on most continents, and there's, a lot of subtle differences. And then there's also, as you get further north, a lot of people weren't necessarily using brain, but just, in other places people use kind of brain substitutes, or other dressings that do something similar, but a lot of just hand manipulation. And then a friend of mine, Kevin, was saying that part of the reason why is because in really, really low temperatures, like way sub-zero, like down to minus 30, minus 40, brain tan actually gets stiff, but other leathers, hand manipulated without an oil-based dressing, will stay supple.
Oh, wow.
Once you get down below minus 20. And buckskin is fine down to at least minus 20, because I've worn it in minus 20 a fair bit, and minus
like
25.
tanned, or like some other, but you wouldn't use...
I mean, urine tanning is more similar to, a lot of people would say that the urine tanning isn't a true tanning. It's partly to break up the fat. You're using the
It's more of a thing that bucks.
Basically, yeah, or just breaks up the fat and gets the fat into solution. or as a preparation for hand manipulating. Like that's something else, like urine tanning, like the Sami are using urine tanning for sure, and alder tanning and such, or like that's one of the areas that I'm most familiar with it being traditional.
There's a lot of conversations that happen around like people of European descent wearing buckskin or like engaging in the like making buckskin, and like where I'm always thinking about like, so where does that line lie with what we own culture? I mean, this is a huge conversation to talk about, but you're like someone that definitely knows a lot about high tanning, and I'm just curious your opinion because, you know, I've studied with Jim Croft, the bookbinder, who has tons of information about European high tanning stuff because he uses it in his books to emulate medieval books, and it's still vague, like, you know, who owns what, or like where does it all? I mean, yeah,
Totally.
maybe you have something to say about that.
Yeah, I do, and I definitely speak to that in my book. You know, it feels really important to me to address such issues, and I'm really clear in my book that I am not doing traditional patterns. So to me, the hide tanning technologies, again, really, really similar technologies practiced all over the world. So whoever you are, you probably have ancestors that were doing something like brain tanning, including if you're of European descent. To me, where it starts to get dicey is if you're using that brain tan to make something that looks like a particular style of Native American dress. And I am really clear in my book that that's not a book about doing replications of that kind, and I don't support that.
Because one of the books you're writing is specifically about sewing leathers and
it's about making buckskin clothing. And I talk about that even just in the title, Buckskin Revolution, like taking buckskin forward into the current era, rather than trying to recreate like a re-evolution of buckskin and buckskin clothing for today's times.
And rather than totally like romanticizing like the past and other people's cultures, turning it into an unusing.
But that said, you know, there are probably some Native people who have, you know, a real problem with people of European descent wearing buckskin at all. And where do you draw the line, and how do you do what's comfortable? And I say what's comfortable for me and my belief. And I also don't feel like I can dictate to anyone what they choose to do, because there is no right or wrong. But I certainly, you know, say that I think that it's really important to honor and respect the people that these technologies are coming from. And a lot of people, there's this idea that imitation equals flattery, and that you're honoring someone by copying their things, and that doesn't really ring true to me, especially if it's without consent and if it's doing harm to people. You know, I feel like there's some gray area, and there's some areas that don't feel particularly gray to me, like, you know, like naming sports teams after Native people and waving rubber tomahawks and stuff like that. That's pretty distinctly disrespectful and not okay to me. And obviously there's people who think it's fine, and there's people who think having anything to do with any technology or crafts that Native people have done is totally wrong. So yeah, but what I personally do is I don't use fringe on my clothing, because I feel like that's really associated specific to Native American style dress, and it doesn't feel respectful to me. It feels like it's over the line of appropriation, or at least close enough that it's not something that I want to do. That hasn't always been true. I did, when I was in my early 20s, do that, and I didn't have as much a critique of cultural appropriation at that time. Like that wasn't a term I'd ever heard of. I mean, I took a Native American name when I was 19. You know, like Woniya is not my given name. It's a Lakota word, and I made that choice again when I was 19, and didn't freaking occur to me, because I'm an entitled, white, privileged white person, you know? And most white people, that is not part of their discourse or what's available to them. And that was true of me. So, yeah, but I address that when I teach and when I talk about it in my book and such. So for me, fringe is something that it's easy for me to decide not to do and have that be a clear-cut line. And like specific replications of specific dress, I don't do. But I've worn leggings, you know. I mean, a lot of peoples around the world have worn leggings. It's way easier to make leggings than it is pants.
Like buckskin leggings that go under a skirt or some other clothing you have on.
Right, yeah. But, you know, but I also don't go up to people wearing fringed, you know, I have people who I love and respect who wear fringed clothing, and that's their choice. And mostly they're not specifically trying to replicate, they just like fringe. And I occasionally have clothing ordered where people want fringe on it, and I will do that, but I don't like to, and I don't do it when it's a specific native design, you know?
If someone's like, I want to copy this particular thing I saw online, and will you do it? And
I am actually doing that for one friend of mine who is someone who I've been friends with for over 20 years and who has actual deep relationships with a lot of native people, and particularly the group of people, Apache people, who this pattern that he wants me to do comes from their tradition. So it's a jacket of a particular friend of Geronimo's, actually, and I did agree to make that jacket for him, and it's a little edgy for me, and I chose to do it, and I trust his intentions more than I would some random person who asked for that. But it's dicey, it's a gray area.
I feel like that's a theme, and a lot of the conversations I've had for this audio project, it comes down to the line is not, it's like not black and white, you know. And it's not necessarily that we as people of European descent are going to necessarily determine for other people either. We're just like bringing it up and figuring out how to navigate it within ourselves. And, you know, like how do we, you know, and it, you know, where the conversation's going in a bigger way is probably going to be pretty different even in 5 years. So we're just trying to be open, you know, and sensitive, and not always defending things that you don't need to hold on to sometimes too,
right.
You know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Like, I gotta have the fringe because I just want it and I have to have it. Like, well, whatever, just let it go, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all interesting questions and conversations.
I had someone tell me that brain tanning was only done in North America, specifically using brains. Maybe you know.
I have certainly seen records of it being done in Japan. And there are really similar processes done in Africa. I'm trying to think if it's specific brains or not. Well, and it's so hard to know. And Northern Europe, I think that it is done. I mean, certainly more like mainland Europe. What was more common is chamois, which is an oil tanning that's not specifically brains, but it's a similar process using something similar to brains. But also, how do you know when there are tribes in the U.S. that weren't doing brain tanning. They were using liver, or they were using eggs, or something different, you know. It's the kind of thing that wherever humans go, they're ingenuitive and they're finding things in their environment that works for them. And some of them might have found brains to work, and some of them might have found something else. And maybe that was only one valley that had that tradition to use that, and they use something different. One family, and they use something different. Like, I think it's really hard to claim something as one's own when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of years of human history, and you don't freaking know. And none of these things leave. Yeah, and none of them leave a fossil record. So who are we to know or say? Something very, very similar has been done, and something just like it. But there's also a question of, you know, where did it come from and where did it go to? I mean, there's people who think that brain tanning is in North America because it came from Japan across Bering Land Bridge, or no, that wouldn't be it would be coming from like Siberia across the land bridge. But, you know, that maybe it's Asian in origin, and it came with people when they came from Asia to the New World.
Wow.
You know, and there's no freaking way to know.
And to say that we, you know, who can do it and who can't based on that long of deep history too. And
Right.
like, where do you also draw the line historically?
Right. I mean, some people think that Vikings were here way, way, way before any other white settlers, and there's all kinds of stone relics that look like they're Viking that are from way back, and which direction things came. I mean, I just don't know how you prove or know, and I think that we get in trouble when we try to make hard statements about things in ancient human history.
Yeah. Sometimes I talk about generalizing a lot and where to do that and where not to do that, and sometimes it's really helpful. Like lots of plants in this group do these things. They like the soil, but then other times it's really not helpful.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. If someone wanted to start getting into high tanning, I know that, we could get pretty geeky and just start going into the whole process, but that might be kind of crazy. But
yeah, and it's not like, it's something that I've done a lot of and has been kind of my thing because no one else was teaching it, but it's just one of the many things that I do and that I'm passionate about too. So
if someone who's never done it before just wanted to get started, where would you tell them to go? I guess we won't talk about what you actually do, but like what.
Sure. I think that learning from a person is really helpful. Yeah, there are certainly books and good books and videos out there, and some of the things that you're looking for are so subtle. I also think that there are a lot of not great hide tanning teachers out there, to be perfectly honest. And it's partly the way I am and the way my brain works is I am a very detail-oriented person, and I really need to understand a process. I don't do well with someone just saying, you do this. Like, I need to understand why. I need to explore. I need to play around with it. I need to screw it up some to actually believe that this thing is important, versus doing it a slightly different way. That's the kind of mind I have. I know a lot of people that isn't true for them, and they just want to be told what to do. But to my mind, I think not enough hide tanning instructors really understand the biochemistry of skins and brains and pH, and I hear people explain brain tanning in a way that it doesn't seem accurate to me. So that would be my caveat. I think it's great to learn from a person, and I don't think that all teachers are equal or doing a great job necessarily.
Well, okay. I wanted to ask you about some other things too, and you just so you've been doing a lot of things with crafts and material stuff for a long time, and then recently you just did part of a program called Weaving Earth, right? Which they do some crafts and stuff there, but mainly it's what you call soft skills type work. And how would you describe that experience and how it's affected your life, like how you see what you're doing next in your life?
Yeah, I would say that it's affected it hugely and improved my life and outlook and who I am as a person dramatically in all kinds of ways. And yeah, there are some skills components to it, but to me they're a pretty small part of it, and that certainly none of it is to the level that I've been doing, for most of my adult life. So it wasn't a craft program at all for me. But it's really it's about a lot of different things, and it has shifted a lot. Like last year we had a really big social justice component. But it's about how to be on this planet as a human in a good way in these times where our culture, particularly our culture here in the US, is pretty broken, and a lot of people are desperately unhappy and feel really isolated and emotionally shut down. So it's about recognizing that, grieving it, getting full access to our emotion and our sense of curiosity and wonder, which gets kind of bred out of you by the standard school system and just culture and technology that we're exposed to every day of our lives. So to me, it's about remembering how to be fully human. And to me, that means like emoting, communicating, gathering together and supporting one another, having practices that move with the seasons and what the earth is doing and needing, and how to connect, kind of like I was talking about. I've felt for years I was trying to get at the same thing. In fact, the mission statement of my school I was running in Oregon and Weaving Earth were almost the same thing. Literally, it was like encouraging connection within ourselves, with other humans, and with the landscape around us. And I was basically we're trying to get to the same place, and each focusing on a different doorway into that. I was at the front door and they were at the back door, or vice versa, however you want. But like I was trying to get to that place through skills, and they're trying to get to that place through addressing it directly and throwing in skills to make it more physical and grounded in the body. And so, but I think that I found that their way is more effective, because it's really easy to be in the skills for other reasons, or just to just get wrapped up in the minutia of the skills and not reach and not reach those deep places. So, like I was talking about, like to me, part of my inspiration about hide tanning is that I freaking love the hides and the buckskin, and I think they're amazing and practical and beautiful and wonderful wear. But it's really about what it represents, and that's the connection with the wild through taking this wild thing into your life and transforming it and carrying it around with you and bringing it to the civilized places to remind you that you're much bigger than this civilized person. You're connected to the landscape and a human past that has a rich relationship. Whereas they just dive right into that rich relationship. And there are tons of people, I think, who wear buckskin without going to that place. I think that they want it in their psyche. I think that's why people feel drawn to buckskin. But for some people, that part of it is buried so deep they're not consciously aware of it. But I think that there's a reason why. So one of the things that I like about buckskin is because it's true that all of us have ancestors who wore it. And it's a craft and a material that go back so deep into the dawning of human history, that it has this kind of magnetism and magic for people. Like somewhere deep inside of us, we have a memory for what it was to wear it. And I think that's part of why people are so drawn to it.
I mean, we could talk about other material things like felt and wool and...
Yeah, totally. And those are less universal. They're less universal. Those, for example, like there's not much record of that in the New World. It's mostly European and Asian.
Herding cultures, or sheep herding cultures.
Because even, and it's been a part of New World's people for a long time, like, the Southwest, Navajo, those are, very sheep centric cultures, but those were sheep that were introduced by the Spanish. They were brought over from Europe. There's not history of people domesticating bighorn sheep and using their fiber. People on the Northwest coast were using mountain goat fiber and weaving with that.
Yes, when I interviewed Samuel, who was the first guest on the podcast, he talked about the weaving technology in Oaxaca and how it changed because of Spanish influence, and that they took it and they still use those looms, and that they've turned it into their own thing, like they mixed what they did before that and what they did after that together, it's just its own thing now.
And I shouldn't say that there was no New World, because like llamas, alpacas, vicuñas in South America, those definitely were traditionally parts of people's cultures before Spanish, but sheep wool and felting, not necessarily. But yeah, no, there's lots of things about which it's true. I mean, fiber and cordage, plant-based cordage, that's fair, not totally universal though, because a lot of peoples were using animal hides or sinew or what have you.
I really love how when it intersects with plants, it's really depends on where you are. Like the Pacific Northwest, you have like cedar clothing, and that makes sense with the environment to have things made out of cedar. And then you go to places where there's birch trees, and that things suddenly become, a different plant, or
Yeah.
southeast.
Linen and cotton and what's in the southeast?
Well, and I'm also thinking about how baskets and clothing merge in that way too. You have dog banes and river canes in the southeast, and
Right.
other fibers as well. But I don't know. It's what's abundant, what's available, what people tended in the lands that they lived in, and like how they traveled or stayed put. And
Yeah. I mean, and I might be, well, I am biased, but I've really seen it out in the world that people of all walks of life are fascinated and drawn to buckskin, where I'm wearing out in public. And you see people are fascinated with leather. I feel like it gets to people's psyche in a different way than I've seen wool and plant fibers do.
I found it to be a bridge, like connecting. I'm from like the rural South, and I think it's hard for me sometimes to connect with this place that I grew up and the ideology of people there, even though it's a part of my heritage. But then I feel like something about tie tanning and buckskin and leathers is like a way that I can have conversations with people because they're interested in it.
Yeah.
There, even if we might not have the same political beliefs. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. 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 It feels unique to me in that way, which is part of why it's been what I focused on or have recently been focusing on. I mean, it wasn't always. I was into this. I mean, I taught fiber arts, spinning and felting and weaving for many years before I was teaching buckskin, actually, and wild foods and food preservation and wild crafting and that kind of thing. So, yeah. But in the last decade, I've focused more on it because I just recognize how powerful it is for people and what a lack of really good information I feel like there has been. There's just not a lot of resources around making really functional clothing. When I first got into the ancestral skills, which back then it was always called primitive skills, and that phrase doesn't work for me as well. But a lot of the clothing was rough, untailored, just like tacked together here and there, and had more of what I call the caveman aesthetic. And I think, when I first got into this stuff, it was pretty close to the like big reemergence of like kind of the start of the modern ancestral skills scene. It was when a lot of the gatherings on the West Coast were just getting started. And so I think hide tanning, brain tanning being available to people was new enough that just having anything made of brain tan was so exciting that people didn't think about really high quality clothing and really functional, well-tailored clothing. And so part of my thing has been really highly functional, tailored, comfortable, practical clothing that you can wear. You don't feel like you can only wear to gatherings, that you can wear walking down a street in a city and not have people stare at you and wonder what, holler you just crawled out of. Because that was people's reaction often back 20 years ago. To a lot of the kinds of clothing that people were making back then. So I just saw a real need for more training and like actually bridging. And that's part of the idea of like buckskin re-evolution is a re-evolution of it, like bringing it to the modern age in a way that's functional, given our modern freaking lives, which look different than they did people hundreds of years ago or, pre-colonization native peoples here. So, yeah. It also feels important to say that when I was first getting into the skills movement, a lot of folks were really focused on the survival skills aspect, and it was the idea of like naked into the wilderness was a big part of why I got into it. I mean, doing Stone Age trips, spending time in the woods with just gear that you had made, no metal technology, that was definitely a big focus for me, and a big part of the drive was to be out in the wilderness for extended time using these skills. And I feel like over the last, I'm 43 and I got into this, or we could say it's 2019 now, and I first got into this in 1995, so that's 24 years. So I feel like I've seen a big shift in the focus of the modern skills community in that time, and it's gone from more survival skills focused to more craft focused. And a lot of people who these are just kind of hobbies and they just kind of make things, but they don't necessarily ever have any intention of spending time in wild places using those things or using those skills. And so yeah, it just feels important to say that that's part of why I got into this stuff and what my focus was for a long time. And recently I've kind of noticed how different it is and really longed for more of the wild time using these skills and
merging the craft and the survival skill like draw.
And so recently, just this spring, I was doing a called a survival trip, so going out into the woods with a group of people, and not with all Stone Age technology, but with real minimal gear and simple gear and wild foods. And it was just a 3.5 day wilderness trip with a group of people doing that. But just being out there like that, I just felt like I was coming back into this part of myself that I really missed, and had a lot of deep messages from the land, and particularly one really deep encounter with a bobcat that was like, this is like, it was calling me back to that, like, this is what you're supposed to be doing, this is what it was all about.
Well, I just feel better out in the woods, and I just feel better with the worms. Down with the mushrooms, deep in the dirt. Well, I just feel better out in the woods.
My passion is definitely teaching people this skill, these skills. I mean, I am someone who has always felt really driven to change the world. Like, just learning how to do this or that for myself isn't it for me. I care so deeply about this world and these wild places and humans, and seeing the misery that so many modern humans are in, and the ways that allows us to lash out and cause huge devastation in the world, or just be oblivious to the destruction that our modern lifestyles do. Well, I think deeply feeling it on a deep psychological level that a lot of people don't even recognize. It matters to me to do something about that. So that's part of where teaching matters to me. It's not just about teaching specific skills. Again, it's about empowering people and giving people options so that they feel like they have choice. I feel like so many people feel trapped by the modern lifestyle and aren't happy but don't know what to do about it. And I feel like I have some ideas about some things that we can do about it. Not that they will necessarily make change on a global scale, but if they make change on an individual level where just people feel less helpless and less desperately unhappy, that is going to make a difference in those people's lives and in how they interact with the land around them. And then that's going to spread to the people who they then interact with. And
one less thing being bought that was made, out of plastic in a factory somewhere.
Exactly.
One less part of that.
Yeah. And a lot of people say, well, that doesn't really make a difference. But it makes a difference on the small scale. It makes a difference to those individuals. It makes a difference in that landfill that's closest to them, and maybe they'll feel less inclined to fill their life with stuff from Walmart if they feel more fulfilled in a deep way and aren't trying to fill the hole with stuff and media and what have you. So that's always been my vision, is how to provide people with more choice and how to teach skills that provide people with more sense of connection and satisfaction and curiosity and joy and wonder, and brings people together in beautiful ways. And so, again, that's why I recognized that, one, I couldn't keep teaching the way I was doing in my community on that land, because that land was unpermitted buildings.
The land in Oregon.
The
where you
land
had
in
the
Oregon.
school. Yeah.
Because it was basically potentially, it was putting the community at jeopardy because it was bringing people to a place
Too public.
that's, yeah, exactly. And so I couldn't really advertise it enough to get enough people to make it financially sustainable to run, with keeping the numbers low and keeping it on the down low because it wasn't legal enough. And I also felt like I wasn't quite reaching the deep places inside people with just the skills alone like I wanted to. And I saw that this program, Weaving Earth, seemed like it was doing that more effectively. And that's why I stopped what I was doing and I moved to California to do that training with them to see how I could integrate that into my studies. There's potentially as many as 3 years of that program, and I've only done 2. But also I feel like I've gotten the meat of it, and the 3 years aren't separate years. They're all in the mix together. So it's not like there's any course content I haven't gotten from it. It's just more time doing it and in a different leadership role, slightly different take on the same things in each of the different years. So I'm at this crux now where I'm like, okay, I did that training and now I'm ready to be getting back to my own programs and my own teaching more deeply, and what does that look like now, and how do I integrate all of the things that I've learned. And so I've been working on writing my book Buckskin Revolution for a while as a way to reach more people, because I recognize that there's just a limit how many people I can teach, one-on-one or in small classes. So one of the things that I'm doing to reach that goal is finishing my book and getting it out there in the world so a lot more people have access. Wanting to that's kind of putting my teaching on hold a little bit more back burner now, just because I was trying to do it all and the book wasn't really moving forward.
Get the book done and then maybe start another mentorship program or something.
Exactly. Or do more traveling and teaching in wider spread regions that don't have access. I really am really interested in being involved in some of the various movements that people I know have been doing in terms of doing some teaching on reservations. But it also feels really important to me to not just be a white person trying to teach skills, but to support Native artists who are trying to keep their traditions alive and having a hard time with that. So it matters to me to have my business be financially viable enough that I have more to give and help support other people through that in whatever feels most supportive to them, whether that be putting together classes and bringing them in to help teach, whether that be through grants that just helps them meet their cost of living while they're focusing on their traditional arts, whatever that looks like that's most supportive to people. Because I don't want to assume that I know what's best and most supportive to people, and I don't want to be like a white person seeing themselves as a savior and like putting their will or ideology on other people. But yeah, so, scholarships to some of the things that I'm doing, reduced rates for other material goods or what have you, or things that I teach for Native people. Those are certainly kind of like the minimum of what I intend to do towards that way. But for right now, just kind of in this place of figuring out what the next iteration is going to look like and where it's going to be. I moved to the area I'm in now specifically for this program, and I'm not doing the program this year, but I also know that when I'm on the move or don't have a home base, then I really have a hard time staying to a schedule and getting intense projects like this done. Plus, I might take a break for a while and then do the 3rd year of the program again the next year or sometime in the future. So, I'm in kind of a holding pattern right now. Also, I have had a big opportunity that's going to come with some publicity in this last year, and I know that that's likely to change what my life looks like a little bit, and just trying to figure out how to have that change be the best for me and the best for the world and my greater vision, which is a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah.
But I'm also really interested in collaborating more with more teachers. I've been, I have taught at a ton of gatherings in different places around the country, but all really within the ancestral skills gathering framework. And that's limiting. It's a lot of the same people over and over. So I'm interested in collaborating with other groups of people and other types of teaching frameworks. So I'm interested in going to this global bushcraft symposium this summer in Canada, which is still connected to the ancestral skills world, but not quite as specific as the standard gatherings I've been doing in the same groups. So yeah, that might look like teaching at folk schools, and I'm in conversation about possibility of being involved in the starting of a folk school right in this area.
I think folk schools are interesting, yeah, because I've spent some time with Jim and Melody Croft, who don't really come to gatherings. They have a little bit back in the day, but they involve themselves more in like the folk school world, or they don't go. They just do their thing at home in solitude. But
yeah, and I'm not someone who can just do my thing at home in solitude.
Well, Jim goes out and teaches at like colleges and like Penland and J.C. Campbell Folk School and things like that.
Yeah.
But like he's coming at like process and like materials being really important from a kind of a different angle than I see a lot of ancestral. But then yet they make sense, like if So it's been interesting for me to go there and see the kinds of people that come to his classes and how they're really interested in things like high tanning, but they're like librarians,
Right, yeah,
They're like, wait, I see this parchment all the time, and I didn't know this is how you.
So that's the kind of thing that I hope, like with book tours, to make more connections with more people and spread it. Yeah, I think I could do more good and reach a lot more people if I'm traveling in much wider circles. And so that's something that I'm shifting towards and interested in.
How can people find you online? And yeah.
I'll have a website, www.buckskinrevolution.com. You can also, at this point, probably Google my name, and it will take you to that. I have a mailing list, a contact form on that website, where you can sign up for a mailing list and get updates on when my book will be ready for publication, and classes and events and such. And I usually only send out 1, maybe 2 emails a year at this point. That might shift as I get more professional. But currently that's the best way to reach me is through my website. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm also on Facebook and Instagram.
What's your Instagram?
Buckskin Revolution.
Buckskin.
Yeah, pretty easy. At this point, it's all pretty streamlined. Buckskin Revolution will get you to me.
Cool.
And that's also the name of my first book. So,
Sweet.
Yeah, which maybe I should diversify a little bit, but right now, that's my handle.
Well, you start with one thing, and then maybe you'll then want to write books about a bunch of other stuff too.
Oh, I've got like 5 books on the back burner, or somewhat started outlines for them.
Wait, there was one you mentioned the other day. You actually started at one point about.
Oh, about knitting?
Knitting?
Yeah, I didn't get very far with that, but yeah, about switching from American style to continental style. And then also I've had a bunch of ideas about pattern books because I make up all my own patterns for knitting stuff. Not all, but mostly. In fact, I can't remember the last time I followed a pattern for anything. I mostly make up all my own patterns, yeah. I could maybe mention the other books that I potentially have online. One is a book on living without refrigeration.
Ooh.
So I'll not just food preservation, but like strategies for setting up a life where you aren't dependent on that. Book on raising rabbits in a more natural way that's healthier for the rabbits and for you. A book kind of like a country living almanac, like a land-based almanac with the different activities, kind of with different activities that are on kind of a seasonal cycle with what's happening in the landscape any given month of the year.
I think that would be cool, like a book, like a guide, a catch-all, like this is what you could be doing this month, here are some ways you could do it. And
exactly,
and it'd be cyclical and like follow that like seasonal lifestyle pattern from the soft skills and the craft and hard skills.
Totally. So yeah, that one's one that I already have started, but it's been on the back burner, because of the other ones. So, those are the main ones. But so yeah, I got a lot. In
You gotta get you some writing grants or something.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that I realize. What's slowing down my book so much is I still have to support myself.
Deal with capitalism.
Exactly.
In the world.
Yeah, and then trying to do that with handcrafts takes a whole lot of time, and there's no way to write a book while you're trying to support yourself by making buckskin clothing because I do all hand stitching. So hopefully the book will.
I'm excited for it to come out. Ever since I've known you, you've been working on it.
Yeah,
And,
it's been a long project.
Yeah. I'm like, when is it going to come out? Because to be able to open up a book when you're working on a project and
it's huge. Yeah, hopefully really soon. I mean, I'm really hopeful, and I've been thinking that for a long time. But that's part of why I'm not going on with the third year of this program, is to focus on writing. Yeah, because I thought that I could keep working on it in between program times, and there was just no way.
Are you self-publishing it?
I am, yeah. I think that I might not do that with all of the books, but for this one, self-publishing has been the plan all along.
Did Tamara and Stephen's his name, Wilder, or...
Tamara Wilder and Stephen Edholm. Yeah, they self-published.
Self-published.
All of the buckskin books that I know of, Blue Mountain Buckskin by Jim Riggs, Deerskins into Buckskins by Matt Richards, and Ancient Art of Brain Tanning by Stephen and Tamara, those are all self-published.
Is it because people renegade and they don't want to deal with a publisher, or you think it's because it's really
partly because the contracts are not, no, it's you get a bad deal as an author with a publisher, particularly for that style, like the how-to style book, and because most, and this is what I've gleaned from people like also Kiko Denzer, who self-published his Build Your Own Bread Oven, that you get a small percentage of the profits if you go through a publisher, and you lose a lot of control over it. It ends up getting sold through Amazon, where you get just like teensy, that reduces the prices a lot. And then you get a little percentage of that. You sometimes lose control over further editions of your book. Like you really lose a lot of intellectual property rights or whatever to what you've written through publishers. And then also they don't promote it very well. Like they'll promote it at first and then they'll just kind of stop because they move on to the next thing. Wow. So they're not invested in it like you are. You're just a flash in the pan, one more book to them. So they're just never going to do as well by you as you could potentially do by yourself. That said, it's harder to get it into bookstores and libraries and that kind of thing. So there's, as with anything, there's benefits and drawbacks to it. But it seemed like the way to go. But for this other book that I'm working on, I think I will look for a publisher because it will be a nonfiction but not a how-to, and more of the kind of thing that like short-term high publicity book tour type thing would be really useful for. Mm-hmm. Being different than the how-to type thing. So yeah,
like a more story-based book.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I think there people out there are looking for a lot of these things, and I think it's better, like you said, doing it through the organic process of networking in real life than dealing with the big corporate publishing entity. I really don't...
it's not who this stuff is geared, it's trying to show an alternative. So if the very means by which it gets out into the world is through the megalopolis publishing giants, it's a little counter to the whole idea.
I do know a couple people who've done it that way, and it is hard for them.
Like Nick Netto's book, or
I remember him telling me about that.
And his is really out there and easy to find, and in a lot of bookstores, and looks great, and is really polished. I
don't know if he's really made enough off of it though. Even at that, I don't know. Right. I haven't talked to him in a couple of years about it, but.
Well, I think that's part of the deal. That's part of why people told me it wasn't really a great way to go. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Was there anything else you want to share about any of your
I don't think
projects
so.
coming up?
Not currently.
Okay.
Yeah. More eventually when I can share more.
Yeah. We'll do a part 2.
Yeah.
With some stories.
Yeah, that's fun.
Well, all right. Thanks so much.
Great. Yeah, thank you. It was fun.
This episode of the Ground Shots podcast was produced by Opia Creative. Our music is by Mother Marrow. If you'd like to help us continue to make this audio project a reality, consider becoming a monthly supporter on our Patreon page at patreon.com/ofsedgeandsalt, where we have rewards like entry into patron-only giveaways, additional audio interviews, extra educational content, and much more. You can also share our work and give us a review on iTunes. Visit our website at ofsedgeandsalt.com to see what else we're up to and a log of our episodes when they come out. Check out our show notes for information about how to find us and our guests. Until next time, y'all, thanks for listening.